Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. It's so nice to be able to do these events in person and see so many faces in the audience. I'm Nina Achadjian. I'm a partner at Index Ventures, and I'm so excited today to have the opportunity to speak with Alexandr Wang, the founder and CEO of Scale AI. Alex, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. And Nina, by the way, congratulations on making it to the Midas List Brink list.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's
News
really
just
nice.
in, came out yesterday.
Thank you. Well, you're too kind. Well, the story today is really about the incredible journey that Scale AI has had. So tell us maybe just how did the whole story begin? What were you thinking about this problem? How did you come across this massive market opportunity? And just kind of give us a sense of the early days of the company building part.
Yeah, so I always like to start this story with my background because I think that it's always hard to disentangle your early background from how you end up starting a company. But I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Both my parents were physicists at Los Alamos National Labs. And so I grew up with this deep appreciation for science, technology, always thinking about what were the upcoming technologies, how were those going to affect the world, what were like the inner workings behind those technologies. And so that was really like the petri dish, so to speak, that I grew up in. And then when I went to college and I was sort of like was studying computer science and programming, there was this was back in 2015, there was this crazy new technology called AI, and in particular deep learning. And this was the early results were there was this famous algorithm that could tell whether or not there were cats in YouTube videos. This was probably 2013, I think. And so it was like this technology that seemed really, really magical. And when growing up as a programmer, despite how powerful computers are, you realize how limited they are. Programming is a lot of giving very, very clear and simple directions to computers to be able to accomplish incredible things. But again, you're really limited. It's very black and white. And as I thought about the implications of artificial intelligence and deep learning, it created this potential for judgment and intelligence and sort of like gray area decision making to be added to computers, which was very powerful. So it was this incredibly inspiring technology. And then I was studying it at MIT. Very excited, had some incredible professors studying in great detail. And then I wanted to build a side project. So I wanted to build a camera inside my refrigerator that would tell me when my roommates were stealing my food. And yeah, it's like a very college problem. Thankfully that was not the startup idea, but the next thing was a startup idea. And I started working on it for a few weeks, and I realized there's just no way to get enough data to actually build it. And so it was like, this is going to be a problem,
In what way? There was like too much footage for you to go through to figure out like what actually was being taken when, or?
Yeah, well, if you think about all the data you need to build this algorithm effectively, you need data about all the different kinds of products that you might have in a fridge in all the different configurations, as well as data about all the different ways in which somebody could go and reach in, grab something. Maybe somebody just tries to grab something at first and then grabs something else, and there's all these different configurations, this sort of like very complex machine learning problem, and not unlike self-driving, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a bit, it just required just massive amounts of really high quality machine learning data sets that were impossible for me to get as a developer. And so, and I was lucky, this was in 2016, and AWS and Stripe had already been these massive successes, really built upon this idea of how do you empower like the college dorm room developer with infrastructure that is vastly beyond sort of their reach, and so that was sort of like this inspiring idea. And applied to AI, I realized, how do you empower the college dorm room developer with just incredible AI technology, and data was really the first step of that. And so that was really the genesis behind Scale, is building the defining company focused around data for machine learning.
Got it. So how did the early pitch go with investors? Did people right away understand the idea and back it? Because you were very early in really identifying this problem and being a solution.
I actually remember there was this like one early pitch. I won't name the VC, but there was this one early pitch. It was where we had this whole pitch deck and talking about AI and the importance of AI, et cetera. I go to the first slide, and it's like AI needs lots and lots of data. Something along those lines. It was the text on the text on the slide. And then the one of the VCs interrupts me. Like I was one sentence into the presentation. Is like, I heard from so-and-so Stanford professor that actually you don't need that much data for AI. And I was just, and he was just like, it was this immediate confrontation. And I was like, I'm not sure, there probably is like a lot of context behind what they were saying, but no, I can assure you that like if you want really high-performing AI, you need lots and lots of data. And so there's a lot, I just was immediately met with skepticism. So that's one of many examples, but the core gist was like, yeah, early on, when you're pitching a startup in the very early days, and you have no proof points behind what you're building, it's very easy for a lot of venture capitalists to just say, oh no, that like this idea is bad, or this idea is silly, or this idea is stupid. And I think it's pretty natural, honestly, because I think, especially for a new technology like artificial intelligence, where frankly we've been discovering a lot about AI even over the past few years. There have been a number of major breakthrough results even in the past year or two. As we're discovering more about it, I think everybody understands more about it, but in the early days, back in 2016, it wasn't that well understood a technology, and so it's easy for people to say no. So, needless to say, I'm thankful to Index for having believed in scale even from the very early days. But that was not everyone. It was a tough journey to pitch it early on.
Wow. Well, after you got your initial funding and you had the money in the bank, tell us a little bit about what the first couple years at Scale looked like. I mean, you must have interacted or actually encountered so many different challenges. When looking back, what were some of those things where at the moment you thought like this is insurmountable, but now looking back, it's amazing to see you, conquer those challenges?
Yeah, so, at least the way I think about it is like early on in a company, you basically have this like, you're constantly fighting two very important battles. One is getting more customers or users, depending on the product, and the other one is getting more, building your team and getting more great people to join you in your mission. And both of these things are incredibly, incredibly hard. And for us, for example, we were trying to convince the smartest AI teams in the world. A lot of them were self-driving companies, who again had attracted some of the most brilliant AI scientists and AI teams, again, in the world, to use our product and really rely a very important part of their stack on scale. And we were this very scrappy young team. At first it was just like, we were a team of 2 pitching these great AI scientists. Then maybe we were a team of 4 pitching these great AI scientists. But we were always this sort of like very, very small team trying to convince these like extremely well-funded companies to rely on us. And that was really, really hard. And I think there were a number of things that we did to actually enable us to get over that hump. But that was, if I were to think about like some of the hardest pitches I've had to make, or the hardest the hardest arguments I've had to make, it's really in convincing these very well-resourced organizations to rely on a small startup. And the same thing is true on the employee side. When you're a very small company, obviously you have huge ambitions and a big dream and a big goal, but it's a big jump for someone to make to join the team and actually be ready to ride in the trenches of a crazy fast-moving startup. And particularly for Scale, we got into a spot pretty early on where thankfully we did a pretty good job getting customers, but that meant that we were really behind in building a team. And so we were always way overloaded from a demand perspective relative to the team that we had. And so every time I would meet with a candidate, they would be like, wow, you guys seem really tired. And you seem like you're working really hard. And we're like, yes, we must.
You're like, hence the open job rule.
Yeah. We have an open job rule. And if you have 5 friends, bring them, please.
Yeah.
But it was, so that was just that sort of like balance was always the trickiest part early on.
I mean, it's truly remarkable. You must have been 21, 22, a team of 2 to 4 people. You were going to these, incredible companies that had world-class AI scientists, like you said. What was the aha moment for them in the pitch where they're like, all right, we'll sign on the dotted line?
Yeah, so one of the secrets to Scale, and I think this applies across almost every industry, but the problem that we originally were solving, which is around building really high quality data sets, was something that most machine learning teams knew was very important, and so most people agreed that was very important, but it wasn't necessarily the sexiest problem that every AI scientist wanted to spend their days and nights working on.
And this is like collecting images, labeling them.
Yeah, collecting images and labeling them and making sure that was done very, very high quality. It was a very, frankly, a very operational problem, and we've built a lot of technology to support it. But again, at its core, it's a very operational problem. And there's one article that was pretty seminal for me early on, which was it was an article by Paul Graham, or an essay by Paul Graham, I should say, called "Schlep Blindness." And I encourage everyone to read it if you get a chance. But basically, the idea was that most people avoid thinking about the really sort of just like hairy, ugly, difficult, annoying problems that exist in the world, but they're really, really important. And he actually uses Stripe as one of the examples in his essay. But there's these problems are everywhere. The sort of like ugly, hairy problems that everyone knows are important, but aren't sexy to work on. And if you can identify what those problems are, then those generally make really exciting startup ideas. So that was kind of that was a lot of the original pitch was like, this is important, but you probably aren't the most excited to work on it. And then we were just, I think we, even very early on, our whole team was super duper scrappy. And so I think a lot of teams and a lot of customers that we worked with saw our velocity and our product velocity and how fast we were moving and thought to themselves like, hey, yeah, these guys, even if they don't have the perfect product today, they're going to get to a product that we're going to be able to rely on really, really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it's truly incredible. You said you started the company in 2016, and the company today, a short, couple of years after that, is worth $7.5 billion, which is incredible. Maybe just some advice for the entrepreneurs that are sitting in the audience. I mean, how did you do it? How did you stay focused? And anything you know now that you wish you knew when you started the journey?
Yeah, there was this thing that I realized early on in starting the company, which was it was going to be the art of being a good founder or a good CEO is being able to constantly reinvent yourself and be able to tackle the new challenges of the company at every stage of the company. And I think that's really, really true. The challenges that we had when we were sort of very early on, just getting our first few customers, were very, very different from our challenges when we were sort of building the initial team up to 30 people, which are very different from the challenges to get from that to 100 people, which are very different from the challenges of getting that scale and sort of a single product company to building multiple products and expanding to new verticals. And so there's sort of been this constant cycle of reinvention required at the company. I think one thing that, I don't know if I would have been happier or sadder to know this very early on in the company, but it's gonna be this, if you have the right mindset, it's gonna be this incredibly rewarding journey of sort of learning and constantly improving and constantly identifying how to be the best at every stage of the company. But it's also a lot of work, and you're gonna have to, you're never gonna feel like, oh, I've got this down. I'm finally, I finally feel like I've got a handle on the problems. You're always going to feel on the back foot and you're trying to keep up with the company. One of the expressions that someone told me very early on when we were in this mode where we had way more demand than the team to support it is that he said wow, you guys have a tiger by the tail. And I think that truly has been how I felt even today at scale, which is if you're doing this, I should say, if the part of the rewarding part about scale has been this feeling of having a tiger by the tail and sort of feeling like we're always trying to catch up to what our customers want or what we know we can do or what we know our potential is, and I think that that's an incredibly rewarding feeling. But it can be it's a real journey. And so maybe the one big thing I would say, we found this, we ended up doing this, but not because we were brilliant about it early on, but I would say it's really, really important for yourself, your co-founders, your early team, and everyone who gets involved in the company early on to really be in it for quite a journey, because it is going to be if everything goes well, like that's incredibly rewarding, but also incredibly challenging, very difficult. You're gonna have to work really hard. You're gonna have to like constantly fall down, have to get back up. Like it's a real trek. It's a real journey. And so I think that making sure that you and everyone else working on it are prepared for that is really important.
Thank you for sharing that. I think you touched on this a little bit, but we, as investors in the company, have been so incredibly surprised to the upside at just how massive the opportunity is for scale. And you have touched already so many different industries, right? You started with transportation. Now you've helped the logistics supply chain, e-commerce, government. Tell us a little bit about how you can traverse so many huge industries and really how you frame the mission of Scale today.
Yeah. So early on, even going back to how I started the company, we knew that data was very, very important for AI. And one of the ways that I explain sort of the strategy of Scale to new hires who join the company is, if you think about it, AI is an extremely general purpose technology. It has the ability to be applied in every major industry in the world. So our mission is to accelerate development of AI applications, but it's really to how do we enable AI across every single major industry in every transformative use case there is. If you were to think about how do you design a company to be able to do that, you need to solve the key bottlenecks in that process of applying AI in every single industry. And that bottleneck, again, if you look at it, just industry after industry, is really all around the data and the data sets. And so the way in which we built Scale and the strategy of Scale has really been, hey, first we're going to focus on how do you build the best possible technology that enables data sets to be built as high quality, with as high volume, as quickly as possible. And then once we have that as a sort of core technology of the company and a core infrastructure platform, then it's really easy to go and apply that to every single major industry. So we applied it initially to autonomous vehicles, transportation, as you mentioned, autonomy, automotive sector. Then we applied it to government and defense, and that's been a really exciting area for us to work on, and something that I care a lot about deeply as an American. Then we applied it to e-commerce. So we work with like Instacart and Etsy, and we're applying it to sort of in this like massive revolution of e-commerce globally. Then we applied it to financial services. So we work with companies like Brex and empowering a lot of the next-gen financial services features, like enabling better expense management, for example. That's all happening through partnership with Brex and enabling them with the best-in-class AI functionality. There's working with Flexport on global logistics, and logistics is still global shipping is still a very paper and manual process, and that the ability to transform the entire industry through digitizing and empowering all of this data with artificial intelligence to enable more automated and intelligent decision making is really powerful. And so what we've done is, again, by starting at the core around how to enable companies with the best data, that enables us to tackle every industry super, super efficiently and super quickly. And our aspirations at this point, we don't think we're anywhere close to being done. We think we're going to, our goal is to really help every single major industry in the world, from healthcare to transportation to logistics to financial services to insurance, every single huge industry, and empower them with transformational AI use cases.
I mean, it's incredible. It seems like the opportunity is endless. But I do want to highlight one thing that we're incredibly proud of, and I know you and the company and your whole team is incredibly proud of, which is the role that actually your technology has played in saving lives in the war in Ukraine. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how Scale has played such an important role in that conflict.
Yeah, no, and this is something, again, that I'm extremely proud of the team, as proud of our technology, as well as I think it's incredibly important. And so in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, intelligence is one really, really important element of that. Being able to know what's happening and be able to make good decision making as a part of that. And one really critical component of intelligence is satellite data. And so there already is I think around 2,000 satellites circling the Earth. There's constant collection of satellite data and satellite imagery from the Russia-Ukraine region. But one thing that's actually a really big bottleneck is being able to analyze this satellite data really effectively. And it's actually a problem that is very applicable for AI to be able to automatically look at satellite imagery and sort of tell you what's going on. And so one thing that we did, in addition to we're in close partnership with sort of government end users, is we basically looked at all the satellite data in the Russia-Ukraine region and are continuing to do so, and analyzed it for a number of key things. One is damage assessment. So in key areas like Kiev, Kharkiv, Dnipro, what is the damage from the start of the conflict to now, to basically enable a strong humanitarian response and enable a proper allocation of resources and people to be able to help provide aid and provide assistance, as well as analyzing changes and movements in tanks or planes or other sort of military equipment. And these things, despite the fact that they're great problems for AI to solve, and they can make a huge difference if you can react really, really quickly in the moment in theater. And so we've analyzed over 2,000 square kilometers. We're constantly analyzing it even now, and it's something that we're really proud of. We think it's having an impact. Our government end users are telling us it's having an impact, and we're really passionate about it. So
that's incredible. Wow, thank you. That's amazing. That's truly outstanding. And I'd love to dig a little bit, because you said it's something that you're passionate about being an American, of just the journey of actually selling into government. So I can't imagine if it was hard to sell into a self-driving car or a group of scientists, how difficult it must have been to then sell into a government and a federal regulated body. Tell us a little bit about the behind the scenes. How did you get a first meeting? Did you have to get security clearance? How long did it take to sign something with a federal entity?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is the members of the U.S. DoD, as well as all members of the U.S. federal government, they first off know just how important AI technology is to the future of America, and I think they all recognize that a lot of the processes that exist today, and a lot of the sort of procurement processes, or a lot of the ways in which the government works with the private sector, need to improve. And so that's a constant topic, and I think that for anyone here who's passionate about it, I encourage you all to sort of outreach to your representatives and talk a lot about this issue. So they definitely know things need to change, but it's a really difficult process, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's so rare for startups to work with the U.S. government and work with the Department of Defense or intelligence agencies, because it's a tough divide, and it's not something that has historically been true with America. If you think about a lot of the great technologies today, a lot of them were built out of partnership between Silicon Valley and the U.S. government historically, but that these sort of two communities have drifted slowly apart. And so that early on, to get meetings, we would have to constantly be networking, and we'd figure out third and fourth and fifth degree connections to be able to get to the right person. I have security clearance, and I've had to, we've had to figure out how do we bridge this gap. We really want to work on these government problems. I went on a trip to China, actually with a fellow index partner a few years ago, and we visited some of the Chinese AI companies, and I just realized it was going to be really, really critical in the United States for us to have the best-in-class AI companies work closely with the U.S. government. Otherwise, we're gonna fall behind. And so that really spurred, our inspiration in working with the U.S. DoD. And I think that at the end of the day, it was really, our strength of mission and our strength of sort of conviction that the United States needs great AI technology for defense and intelligence that allowed us to ultimately bridge that gap and help them. And it was sort of probably all in. It was, and this is extremely fast for government work, but it was probably a year and a half maybe from first meeting to be able to get our first large production contract. And that is one of our investors is Founders Fund, who is a big investor in Palantir and Anduril and a number of iconic companies, and they said that it was the fastest they'd ever seen to get to a meaningful production contract.
That's amazing. Wow. That's right. So one thing that I've heard you say in the past is that you believe that AI needs humans, which is something that a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't say. They say that AI is going to replace humans. So just curious, why do you have that belief, and how has it really organized the mission of Scale AI?
Yeah. So I think that fundamentally, if you look at the core building blocks of AI, or the core setup of AI, AI needs a lot of data. And then data requires lots of humans to be able to help produce and ensure that that data is correct and accurate. And even in, one of the things, even if you look at cases where people say there's no humans involved, it's things where they'll train off of all of the Reddit data. Well, where's the Reddit data come from? It comes from people typing on their computers and commenting in their free time. And so fundamentally, all the data used to train AI systems is going to come from humans in some way, shape, or fashion. And this is something that not only I think we at Scale understand. The most innovative companies in the world, the ones who are able to do the most things automatically, frankly, also really deeply believe this. We work really closely with Meta and Microsoft, for example, two of the most innovative companies in the world, and this is a fact that they embrace, and they actually realize that hey, making sure that humans are really deeply involved in the process of building AI systems, both today and long into the future, is going to be how we actually ensure that these AI systems are performing in line with human values and in line with human intentions. And we're not going to have these sort of weird doomsday scenarios where an AI is doing something that humans wouldn't expect or humans wouldn't be aligned with. And so we've always had the belief that humans and AI are going to need to work together. Humans and the algorithms are going to need to work together to build entirely new consumer experiences, entirely new business processes, and ultimately build sort of a much more powerful and sort of innovative economy. And that's been a core belief at Scale. I think we're actually one of the few AI startups that really embraces this fact, and I think it's something that we really passionately believe, and we don't think is ever going to go away.
That's amazing. And maybe just as a final question, you've described the mission of Scale AI as being the world's AI partner. Tell us a little bit about what you see this space turning into in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so I think at the core, if you look at the massive waves of technology, you zoom out a lot. There was this massive wave of originally the sort of mainframe computer being used in a lot of business applications. The sort of IBM was the first wave. Then there's sort of personal computing as the second wave. The sort of Apple was one of the companies, and Microsoft, and all these companies were involved in that wave. Then you had the internet really spring into life. Then you had mobile, and then software, sort of software in general has been this, and software as a service has been this massive wave of sort of productivity throughout the world over the past 2 decades. These are sort of the massive trends of technology, and I think as a world we're kind of at this point where each of these giant S curves are starting to slow down. I think that the gains of software eating the world, as Mark Andreessen put it, are beginning to slow. The tailwinds of software eating the world are beginning to slow, and the next wave of value, we really deeply believe, is going to be artificial intelligence. And the potential for AI to transform every major industry, again, whether it's agriculture or defense or healthcare or financial services or life sciences, is just absolutely astronomical. But that's only going to happen if we're able to build the infrastructure to support that. So our view is that, frankly, we believe that if you look a decade from now, a lot of the value and a lot of the innovation in technology is going to be from artificial intelligence and AI entering every major industry. And our goal is to be a partner to as many of those industries as possible and enabling that.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for sharing your extraordinary journey and vision with all of us today. Congratulations on an incredible ride so far. We continue to be so excited about what you're doing in the massive markets and industries and even humanitarian impact that you guys are having. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and perspective with us today.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.